She's an Australian who lives in Canada.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honour to be with you today, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to be talking about some big picture policy stuff. And unlike David, I just realised that I've been in this business for 2/3 of my life, which is crazy. It would help me to know by hand who works in a hospital. Who's an academic? Who's an other? Goodness, there's lots of others. I'll talk to all the others afterwards. They sound more interesting. Look, it strikes me that most of you have probably read the book about Steve Jobs. We all know him. He failed many times in his career. He didn't make it the CEO of Apple first time. He sort of went back and did some other things. And there's many quotes that come from Steve Jobs. But one of them was really about what happened when he didn't get that job. And he needed to go back into the trenches, as he said, and really think about why he didn't and what needed to be done. And it's that sticky place, he said, that you really start understanding how to streamline and create the simple solutions. And I think I'm in that sticky place because you think that you know what you're talking about until you realise that you're talking to the same people and you're not getting any more ideas and not giving any ideas. So you've got to look at the world that you're living in a completely different way. So I started to think about how I'm framing the process of ageing, how we frame the process of ageing, and how that's communicated and taken up by decision makers, and how that will influence the way our societies think and act around older people in the future. And a great example, bad example, in Canada is the title of the report. The first report about dementia in Canada. The title is called Rising Tide. The jargon that we use around the demographic tsunami, and it conjures up, I'm a very visual person, so it conjures up, looking at this hill and the millions of older people coming over the hill at me. And it's this, how do we frame the process of ageing and how it's communicated that actually underpins our policies. And if you look at the theories that have underpinned age-related policies over the decades, we've got the disengagement policy theory, where people actually, the notion was older people, as they get older, they actually withdraw from society. Then you've got the activity theory, and you've got successful ageing and productive ageing and graceful ageing. I'm not sure that at any time in one's life we could actually say to someone, well, the diagnosis is that you've unsuccessfully aged. Because it doesn't happen, and yet it's really relatively common to hear those words and even see them in government documents, and actually putting them in our own documents and trying to operationalise them, which is absolutely meaningless. So I've been thinking about why is it so complicated, this policy stuff? And it is. We've seen the attempts of mainstreaming ageing across policies. We're always complaining about the silos, and yet I now understand that I want silos, because that's the only way that government can actually understand particular pieces. So if they're not going to change, let's actually understand how to work within these silos. And I think David and also Robert talked about the connections between. The difficulty around developing policy as it relates to older people is that it doesn't exist. Because if we looked at policy actually in terms of a life course approach, then we can start talking about transportation, and we can talk about hospital care and care of the older person and care of the younger person. But it's very challenging to create policy along the life course continuum. Because what we're also dealing with at this time in our world is the impact of other demographic upheavals, not only population ageing, but we're also dealing with urbanisation and globalisation. And those two upheavals also lock onto population ageing. And so when governments are talking about and trying to develop policies, not only do they need a theory, I believe, that underpins the policy development, which then leads into practice, but they also have to be considering these are the other external forces. And that's very complicated. And also for government officers, where they go there and what they need to do is serve their minister, then the thought of how do we support older people in the future in terms of a care model doesn't actually get onto the white paper. So if we think about the latest, and who's heard of the active ageing approach? The World Health Organization, this is very interesting, the World Health Organization active ageing approach. Isn't that fascinating? I want big hands up. I'm going to phone up the WHO after this. Probably 10%, which is very interesting because it's almost like bread and butter in the world that I live in. But the active ageing framework, which has 3 pillars, health, participation and security, what does it say to you when I say government policy is underpinned by the active ageing approach? Do frail older people fit into that? They don't fit in it in my world. Would they fit in your world? Everybody wants lunch. Sorry?
Only if they're active.
Only if they're active. That's a great comment. I mean, my mother-in-law was in a long-term care facility for something like 20 years, with infarct dementia. Now, how could I even envisage, how could she actively age and perhaps she was. But I think it's very difficult to get one's head around it and also to think about policies and practices that support people in that framework, which underpins many government policies around the world, and I'm sure the UK government, has it somewhere in its guidelines. So I suggest to you that the active ageing approach to policy development, which has been around since about 2002, needs to be reframed. And it needs to be reframed in terms of, or added on to. So could I suggest that a word that might be helpful in the future, and also helpful in the thinking about EASYCare in the future, is capabilities. Because if we look at a human being, they have capabilities throughout their life, from day one to the last day that they die. And if we think about capability, the capability approach, then policy as it relates to all parts of life starts making more sense to me. And it makes more sense in terms of the context of an older person. I now just want to touch on, the interconnectedness. So on the one hand, we're asking older people to remain active, healthy, involved, interested, and yet in many countries there are no retraining opportunities for older adults as they go through life. Older adults, some of them may need to work after the notional retirement age. Why isn't there the opportunity for retraining? It's not third age. These people need paid jobs. The opportunity for people to volunteer into their 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s. In some countries, that's not possible because nobody will insure an older person as a volunteer in their 70s and 80s. The role of older people as family caregivers. Now, my parents have been doing this for ever since I've been alive, I'm sure, looking after someone else's children. and now we are supporting them into their older age. But the formal recognition in many countries doesn't exist. So if I just take you on the path that an older person that's just been retired or made redundant at 55 requires to get a job, but there's no retraining. So the only job that they can get is stacking shelves for night time. And that's going to impact on their role, their ability to take care of their wife, who then falls down, fractures neck and femur in the hospital and is now known as a bed blocker. So, you know, the domino effect of one's capabilities, but also the policies that enable someone to optimise their role in life, you know, is certainly not effective. I just want to close with a couple of other comments, and it comes back to this whole life course approach. The one thing I know now, after being in this job for 12 years and being in this business for 2/3 of my life, is that relationships make or break the world that you work in and the world that you live in. And the IFA, the organisation that I work with and for, you know, we've recognised that talking to the converted is very comfortable and familiar, but it doesn't cut it. So we are now talking, if we want to improve the vision health of older people globally, our partners are the organisations that are content experts in vision. If we want to support or work with people with diabetic retinopathy, we've got no content expertise, but we know that in 2050 there are 2 billion older people. So it would be smart for us to work with the International Diabetes Federation. So it's time for us to be working smarter and more effective than just talking to one another, which is comfortable, but it's not going to get us anywhere. My last comment relates to sectors. And I will acknowledge Jack Waters from Pfizer, because I think Pfizer is a very good example of business partners who are in the business of helping to create change in partnership with NGOs, in partnership with government, you know, supporting and enabling projects such as EASYCare. So if you haven't ever gone on the website and looked at Fear of Getting Old, FOGO, it's time that you did, because this is the second phase of getold.com. And, you know, when you're in New York, you cannot possibly miss, you know, the ground to skyline pictures of older people. So, you know, we're very pleased as IFA to be involved in, you know, the future campaign of the life course approach to adult vaccinations, because the domino effect happens there. And also, you know, interested all the time with the initiatives such as Fear of Getting Old. And, you know, it's these kinds of initiatives that actually stimulate conversation at all different levels. So in summary, I'll go back to my first message, and that was how we frame the process of ageing and how it is communicated and taken up by decision makers is important, because it will influence the way our society is developed in the future. Thank you very much.